Good morning, Chris. How you doing?
Great. How are you?
Doing good. I'm excited to have you on the show. We got a couple people in common from the YC crew, so good shout out. And your background, I get a lot of people actually that, with a lot of the podcasting PR teams that are like reaching out, having people on my show. And I saw yours and I went to your website and I was super excited because of all the verbiage that you had. And you even said the alchemist of creating.
Yeah.
And I love it. I love it. And it's like engineering your ideal life and kind of just teeing it up and I talk a lot about the show about creating your ideal life. And as an entrepreneur, the business is such an ingrained part of your identity. And here you are, and you literally created a career out of helping people with this. So maybe just for the audience, kind of give us a little bit of a background of where you came from and what you're doing today.
Sure. So great question. So my trajectory is I come from corporate America, from 3M actually, and had worked there for many, many, many years. And some sales. And I think, if you look at, sometimes it's easier to see things in the rearview mirror, right? Like kind of looking back and you can kind of it's part of our development and relationship once you have some life experience. And, I've been in the working world now for 27 years. So it's not like, so you have that perspective and you look back and you say, okay, well, I think we should all hopefully orientate our lives on our values. And when I look at sales, like freedom is a value that I cherish, having the flexibility. And then also I'm really about building, I believe life is about creating experiences. It's really what we keep, right? We keep the experience that we have and then we get to create new ones. And so I'm looking ongoingly of how can I create the ultimate life experience that's truly aligned with my values. And it's not, you say, well, gee, that sounds like it's a lot about you. Well, not necessarily. It depends what's in my experience, right? What experiences do I want to have? And how do I want to own that? And it comes from a place of what truly drives me as a human being and and we could use this word called my truth. I believe our truth comes from intrinsic motivation, not from doing something because you're concerned of how it makes someone look, right? If you look at, and I'm sure you've read the study, and I commonly forget her name, but this lady years ago was a hospice worker. You're probably familiar with that, and she did the interviews with people on their deathbed, right? And she published it, and it's been republished many many times. But I think the most important part of all of it is like, what were these people's, and looking back in their lives, and what is it that specifically that they wish maybe had been different. Mm-hmm. And how can we learn from that, right? My clients that I'm working with, the same for you, is that they're somewhere typically between 40 and 65, and somewhere, they can be younger, but that's, in a family business, sure. But the person at the helm, right? The average CEO, like there's in the Harvard Business Review, they just published the new CEO listed an analysis, right? And you look at the ages of those folks, and then so you're looking at, if you're mid 40s or mid 50s, you're looking, where am I at, and where ultimately am I going? And I don't want to be in that place down the road of going like, gee, I wish there's something that I realize now I had control of that could have been different, right? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so how do I generate that? And I think what ended up happening for me is I realized in my career how many people, I became an outlier. And the reason I did is because I wasn't doing something for what everyone else was doing. Like I wanted to generate the best outcomes I could, exceed forecasts as a salesperson, and still create this amazing life experience at the same time, right? And then that was what for me became a tenet. And then I found out I had this natural propensity of mentoring folks and helping them break out of these normal paradigms that come with being in a big company or working in corporate America, because there's a lot of them. And I find that the paradigms that we adopt are ones that are shown in society, and we all kind of we don't question it, right?
And they're really hard to get out of.
Yeah, it is, no doubt, because you have to be conscious enough to know, and then aware enough to see them, right? And we can talk more about that, but there's something that has to happen to unlock that. And so this lady interviewed these folks, and she, one of the things that she documented is the number one thing that people had said is like, I wish I would, and I'm just my words, but it's like, I wish I'd made decisions in a way about what I wanted, not looking at this filter of how it was going to impact someone else or what they felt, I should do. And I'm like, wow, how many of us have done that? In a like, oh, what's my dad going to say or my mom going to say? And I see this all the time on the succession front with families, in particular with kids. And like, should I take this seat and why? And I'm always like, let me just ask you a question. Would you even be considering this if your dad had owned a business? Like, really? Like, like, would you, like, are you even interested in this? Because sometimes people build businesses to get to an outcome, not because they love what they're doing. I was talking to a client of mine who is part of a family that has a bit of wealth, and he's got a lot of opportunity. And he's like, well, what about this? And I'm like, dude, seriously, like, what? I appreciate your drive, but like, let's find something you love and want to do. There's a lot of ways to make money. Mm-hmm. There's tons of them. So like, it's not about a problem of opportunity, right? But so needless to say, sorry.
I was just saying, so how did you get out of corporate America and start doing that though? So like, because you made the jump to start mentoring with these people. I mean, like in getting into the succession. I mean, it's a grueling, interesting world that you and I live in because of so many dynamics that are involved. So like, why did you decide to take the bull by the horns? Yeah.
So what ended up happening was there's someone I knew who would ask me to coach them. So I started doing that. So then now I'm doing that. And then about 8 years ago, there's a friend of mine who said, hey, he's had a consultant, who's a consulting, and he's serving a small, mid-sized business. And he asked me to start, if I'd be willing to do some engagements with him. And because of my sales background and leadership background. So I just started doing some of that. And then the third thing that I got interested in was neuro-linguistic programming. And so I enrolled working with Wyatt and Marilyn Woodsmall, who are very well known in that arena. And I worked with them for several years and became a practitioner in neuro-linguistic programming. And I realized how much behavior drives outcomes.
Can you explain that for the listeners that might not know what that is? I do, because I geek out on this stuff too, but like just in case they don't know what it is.
So NLP is basically, it's the science of behavior change. It was built, 30, 40 years ago. One of the reasons that neuro-linguistic programming became popular was because of Anthony Robbins. He worked with my mentor early on. And so it's basically when he's coaching folks, but what he's doing is not by accident. Like, there's specific things that he's doing. There's methodologies and strategies. And it really comes down to how we unpack our mastery or how someone else unpacks their mastery, and that you can replicate it. And so NLP is about how do you generate an outcome. And actually, earlier when we're just a few minutes ago, when I was talking about being aware, that's part of it, right? You have to have clarity in the outcome you want to have. You also have to have enough what they call sensory acuity. You have to be aware of what's going on. See, if you think about it, we have 5 senses. And so these 5 senses, that's how we take information in. And it's all filtered in our subconscious mind. And then we filter out anything that's not congruent with what we think and believe. So NLP helps you get a deep understanding of what's happening there. And it does, and helps generate behavior change, new outcomes that can happen in regards to how you feel, to what you do, and what you produce. And so I've leveraged it, and not only for myself, but in just all capacities when working with folks.
Well, it's what I find so interesting, because I absolutely love this stuff. I mean, Tim Ferriss is going into this, and then Michael Pollan and all these people that are really, how does our mind make up the stories? It's called the default mode network and the frontal cortex, all this stuff, without going on, because that's not the premise of this show. But I could go all the way down to that. But like, what I find interesting, Chris, is that entrepreneurs as a DNA and a personality type have like the story that they build. They're typically visionaries that build this vision and whatever. And I think I'm curious, as you're working with people, like, how that vision changes over time as they change. And you had mentioned right before we got on the show that this prison that happens as you're evolving, you kind of the vision changes, but then you now have this anchor or this baggage of what you've built. And then how do you rechange your mind and evolve your mind as an owner as you change?
Yeah, that's a really good, interesting question. So let's look at, the context of all of this. And in fact, part of what your question is, what the reason why I just started doing vision workshops, right? Just get together for a day or a couple days. And then next year we'll be starting launching retreats, but around let's unpack your whole life. And like all of
super
it, right?
easy, right?
Yeah,
Super
like,
easy.
and and it's everything from health and wellness to your loving relationships to parenthood to your business to your finances to your impact on the world and the legacy you want to live. All these things to also even with your spiritual orientation, because that's a huge paradigm that runs how we make decisions and how we look at life and ourselves and relationship to life. And I mean, the interesting point, and I'm going to answer your question, but I think the interesting point to consider with all this is that these are all illusions, all of them. Every piece of reality is based on some level of an illusion. So if we're choosing these illusions, why not choose illusions that empower us?
That you like.
You know, like, right? Like, okay, like, you see, like, what's the point of creating an illusion that's disempowering? That's kind of silly, right? Like, so, but we have to really truly accept that that's the potential. And I think what ends up happening for folks is, I believe it's all ruled by consciousness, because consciousness meaning like, what's my level of awareness around all of this, and how am I showing up to that?
Well, isn't it yeah, you're so right. Like I think that, like, so the analogy I literally gave in my presentation a couple of days ago is that when you're aware of this stuff, it's almost like when Neo is in the Matrix and he like sees the zeros and ones and he grabs it and he's like, oh, got it. But like, and you start to realize that, like, and explain, like, because I think like entrepreneurs, you know, typically see this vision that they're marching towards, and however it came to be. So they're maybe a little bit more aware than the typical, you know, worker or corporate worker. I mean, again, that might be a generalization, but then as that's still an illusion that they created in their head, right? So then they might change over time without knowing how they decided to come up with that original vision.
Yeah, no, you're right. And so, in fact, The Matrix, by the way, I wrote a book called Soul Intention, and Matrix is one of the first quotes that the book opens up with. Actually.
That's fantastic.
Anyway, So I think what happens is that I create this business, right? And then it becomes, sometimes it's bigger than I expected. Sometimes it's not. It depends on what the person's, what they're, usually they didn't see it going where it does. And it becomes a living, breathing thing,
organism. Yeah.
Right. And I become part of that living thing. And in some cases, so like if you look at, I believe, two of the most important drivers in our operational network in our mind are, how does life work is one of them. Like what's this story called life, which is a question I like to ask people. Like, well, what is life about anyway? You know, what's your paradigm around that? Why are we here? What's our life experience about? Deep question, really. And the second one is, who am I? Which are the three most powerful. Who am I? Three most powerful words in the English language. Because what ends up happening for a CEO is I become my business, and oftentimes I lose some of my context of who I am, because now I'm a CEO, or I'm a business leader, or my company needs me, and they end up becoming this glue of this part of this person that's kind of like built into.
So true.
You know, this, and then now they're part of it, right? And they're like, so it's almost like they're getting sucked into it, and it's really kind of scary in some cases, right? And then what ends up happening, oftentimes, from what I've seen, is that it becomes I become more and more and more absorbed by it, right, and part of it, and then I'm still maybe I'm married, so I'm a spouse, so. I'm a wife, or I'm a husband, and then I've got I'm a parent, but there's not enough space maybe for all that, and I'm there, but I'm not. So like you run into marital issues, you run into kids that parents weren't around for a lot of their childhood, and there's actually I've got a 5-year-old. My wife and I are later into the parenthood game. Even though we've been together we've been married for 24 years, so we've been together for a while. But regardless, the cool thing about that is that I've been having to work with so many family businesses and seeing what can happen. And when they have older kids, I've been altruistic in our approach in regards to how we want to raise our daughter. And, like I dropped her off this morning at school, like I do every day. And the thing that they're very specific about how I build anchors to that. So anyway, but going back to your question, about the CEO. I think they become part of the organism, and that becomes part of the problem, especially when they decide, as you and I both have questions around, like, what's your exit? Like, when I'm meeting with people, I'm oftentimes asking, like, so what's your exit plan? Like, what do you watch? Like, I got another 10 years. That's a famous
visceral reactions, right, Chris? Visceral reactions sometimes, because it's like it's not just an exit. It's such a loaded question, because are you talking from management responsibilities or from ownership responsibilities or from me, who I am? What about, like, it just like, then it's like complete shutdown mode. And I think what's interesting about what you're talking about is, so in a couple other comments on it. So Kate Spade, when she passed away, because she, like, literally there was a whole article written about her and like this whole identity thing of entrepreneurs, she couldn't recreate her previous business. And because she would, like, and I've had so many quotes, Chris, of, like, one gentleman, he said it was like a surgical procedure to remove the business from me. Like, because, like, right. So there are these visceral, like, and very graphic ideas of, so Kate Spade, in the article, they said that there was an FMRI. So there's brain scan, and the entrepreneur that sees a picture of their kids and talks about the business, it looks the exact same in the entrepreneur's brain.
Oh shit. Really?
Yeah. Isn't that crazy? Oh. So now you think about, and
I could totally see that, though. I'm not surprised by it. But
isn't that crazy? But they actually proved it. So this whole, like, that's not my baby. Like, no, that's a real thing. Yeah. And I had a client say to me, it was his wife, and she goes, "Oh yeah, there's a mistress in our relationship, and it's the business."
Yeah.
So you start to, like, this is so, it's not just a thing. It's not just a make believe thing. It's a real thing. And when I'm really curious, because I literally went through this too, is like, and I watched my dad go through it as, okay, so like, and the reason I believe in that happens is because the people you hire, the clients you take on, the problems you're solving, the systems you're implementing, everything is a derivative of you. How you make decisions. It's like this blank canvas that becomes you. So then what happens is like, I'm so excited to hear your response to this, is like, okay, so like, what happens is one day you wake up because you're really, really having fun. You're in the flow. You're totally jiving. And
is this how you do it? Is this how
you like, yeah, you're just like, and then you wake up and you're just like, you just wake up one day and you're like, screw this shit. And then you become like suffocated, and yet everyone relies on you. Everyone has that make-believe paradigm that you created, and you can't do it. And it's just like, I watched tragedy happen when that happens.
Yeah. Yeah, well, anything can be navigated, right? But I think what ends up happening, that's probably someone who the level of consciousness kind of running at a lower level. I'm a big David Hawkins guy, Power versus Force. I don't know if you've studied any of his work. Really, really cool.
What's his name? David Hawkins?
Yeah, Hawkins, yeah. Yeah, Dr. Hawkins. Power versus Force. That book was, there's like probably 10 game-changing books over my life that I've read. Maybe 20. I'd have a hard time getting it to 10 maybe, but that one would be up there for sure. Really interesting, really interesting. But, it's like, I think my level of awareness, because like here, I'm big about removing resistance, right? Even though I'm a martial artist and studying I'm entering my 35th year of study pretty soon here, studying the same art form of karate. So, but I'm big on resistance. Like, okay, like in order for resistance to occur, there has to be opposing force, right? And we often create our own opposing internal force. Mm-hmm. And how that happens is I start creating a situation where I live incongruent to what I say I value. And one of these exercises he would do, and I've adopted with my clients, is like, okay, we go through some clarity in what we say we value. All right, now we got that. The other part of that for me is it's like, why is that? Because sometimes we end up creating things that we say we value because, this might sound bizarre, but if my love, security, and self-esteem aren't whole internally, then I'm going to create conditions externally to fill my void. Meaning that if I don't feel that my self-concept's high enough, then I'm going to get significance from solving problems. Like
having affirmation from your employees, or
right, exactly. I've had CEOs that I literally would create problems in their business if they didn't have them. I'm telling you,
I agree with you.
They could fix them so they could get significance. Now, my orientation is like, well, okay, let's fix that, because really, if you want the ultimate life experience, wouldn't it be nice to remove that fucking burden? Because that's a burden to me, right? Totally. Like let's it doesn't have to be that way.
Mm-hmm.
What if you became the person who didn't need that? That would be interesting. Then I guess who would you be?
Well, can I give you a little interesting story that is like,
sure.
So my dad went through some personal things when in his past, and without giving any too much into the personal story, he created our family business, Chris, to prove to the world that he was worth something. And
sure.
So it went from $0 to $20 million in 10 years to prove to everybody that he was worth something. The moment that he dealt with the past, he no longer wanted his company.
Isn't that interesting?
And that literally, that was the moment that it plateaued. That was the moment he never went back into the office. I mean, it was that because he just didn't care anymore.
Right.
Because he fixed what was inside.
Yeah. And it's an interesting challenge though, because I've been down that road with business owners, is that if the law of substitution has to interplay here, where I've got to get a new driver. Mm-hmm. And the problem is that if I've created this driver to get to where I want to go, and then you help me whole and I don't need it anymore, it doesn't mean I don't want to be motivated and sit around in a cave and meditate all the time. Even though sometimes I kind of wonder what that life would look like.
Yeah, right.
As a daily meditator, but regardless, we're here to do something. It's just part of how we're set up as human beings. We're developed to grow. Everything in nature is growing, so it's just kind of part of an order of life, I believe. But I had a best-selling author who she was massively miserable, and amazing lady, created awesome success, and it was always about the next bogey. And so the next thing when I was talking to her, her next bogey was I want to get a plane. And I want to get, I have these cars, but I want this car. And I'm like, why? And then I said, do you know why? And she's like, well, no, because, and she was telling me what answer. I said, that's not why. And she said, why? I said, I know why. And she said, well, okay. I said, because you're way too focused on what other people think. That's your ego who wants that. Now, granted, I have clients who love nice cars or nice watches or whatever, but they don't have them to show them off
because they're nice and they like them
because they like it. Right. It has nothing to do with it, right? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, totally.
And I'm like, I said, if we don't fix the reason you're not happy, you will never be happy until we fix this. Ever. It is a hole. You got so many holes in this bucket. You can keep filling it with new goals and new best-selling books and all this, going and the book signings and having all these people throw themselves at you. It's like and so we have to figure out, well, why am I doing it? Why am I passionate about it? And what's going to drive me? But I have had CEOs that are they get to that point, like you said, and the ego starts actually reorientated, and they're like, well, what the fuck's all this for then?
I don't care.
And they just look around you know what? Well, why does it matter? Why does anything matter? I'm well, hey man, let's go get a big bag of weed then, and let's just smoke away the afternoon. I mean, it's
it's so seriously, Chris. I could count probably a dozen times where people on my show were because I mean that's literally what my dad dealt with, and I've watched it personally with clients and the people on the show where I woke up one day and I felt like there was a noose around my neck. It's because they fixed, or that evolution happened, like you're saying, where they didn't need the affirmation or whatever it was for the business, which, financially it leaves an absolute, ton of value on the table because they just wanted to do a fire sale. They didn't do all this stuff. So then the flip of that is what I find is so interesting is because you and I are living and breathing probably this type of the world, the emotional world most of the time. And then there's the financial structures and the data of now we have to have these decisions that are made in logic as well, knowing that there's two parallel world things that need to be solved here. And as far as the emotion and then the financial operations. But what happens is over the last 5 years since we sold and I've gone through this, I was all in the emotional world like you, just like a lot of the entrepreneurs. And then I've learned the other side of the world of all the finances and the logical stuff. All the advisors, and that's a big, my partner would hate me for saying most that I know, they approach it from the logic. So they're going, CPA is saying, Chris, tell me about this. What's your discounted cash flow? And they're going, dude, I'm so broken inside. Like, I'm not selling this shit because like, I don't know what I do. I hate my marriage. And like, so, whatever it is. So you have like people literally talking from two different sides of the world, and it just doesn't work. Let's go
into that for a second. I'm thinking about the people out listening to us right now. Like, whoa, where are we going with? But let's go into that.
They're used to me, by the way. So,
so this is an interesting topic, though. Like this whole idea, because like, okay, for human beings, or spirit, my context is we're spiritual beings having a human experience, and we want to navigate it based upon where we feel pulled to go in a true way that's not aligned with what we think other people want for us. Because we love ourselves and we have security and self-esteem. So okay, we're the best we can be at this time, and we're conscious. So now what? Well, let's talk about the decision. You just mentioned decisions. Let's talk about the decision-making process. Because how we, as human beings, we have this gift called choice, right? I mean, my dog's got choice too, but regardless, but I have conscious choice. And a lot of times we're not conscious of our choice because we're not paying attention. But
so true.
Right? But we have these decisions, and we know like there's how many freaking decisions we make in a day. Yep. From like, what freaking shirt am I going to wear to I'm going out to dinner tonight, and
should I have said yes to that person or no to that person? Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And then how do I navigate? And then there's critical decisions in business. And then I love information. I'm a big data guy. But I think it's oftentimes there's a data overload, and we should be making decisions with knowing where we're at in reality. Yes, 100%. But then there's also the intuitive side too. But the decision still needs to be aligned, I believe, from where would I want to go and what do I want? How do I want things to look for me, and knowing why and what are my values and what am I trying to take care of? Like, when you work with a family business, it's like, I care about my people. I care about my family. I care about myself. I care about my employees when I say people. I care about my customers also. And how do I take care of all those things if I'm going to do a transition? Because any one of those things, it could be in a personal relationship, could be myself, it could be our customers. Any one of those could be at risk, right? And you had said, you alluded earlier, like that, the person that founds a business, they implant that core value of that business into the business. And if it's going to stay that company and maintain the trajectory, like even McDonald's, who's got a newer CEO, who's been done some pretty. I'm not a big McDonald's eater for the folks out, your fans out there, but regardless, just reading about them the other day in the Journal, and they've done some pretty amazing things with their business model. The CEO has, right? But I'm sure he's sticking to still some of the core principles that founder has. So, this question I'd ask you is like, how do you think people typically navigate decisions in business, and where do they get off track, and why?
I think it's so maybe some context even before I answer that. So Simon Sinek just came out with a new book called The Infinite Game, which is amazing. So so Simon Sinek's book Infinite Game, and then the Conscious Capitalism book, which I adhere to, which is like Be Good for Everybody. And like I think that, so here's what I think is interesting is that founders, and I'm not talking about VC backed or like like the financial engineers of like business. I'm talking about people that had a good idea, had a vision, and wanted to fill a void and prove to themselves and to the world that they could do something, right? So that vision evolves over time, and you have all these people that rely on you. And as you continue to change, you do feel that trap, and those decisions. I think you become more and more aware, Chris. It's kind of to your point earlier. So the moment that you kind of become aware, you kind of do the Matrix thing. You go, now I'm here. I've either become aware that I'm, making fires in the business to solve them. How to do that and go through that evolution without burning down the ship. You know what I mean? Yeah. Or like going through. So like, I don't know if like, I think the decisions are being made based on that original vision, but then as a human being, it normally evolves. So like what happens is now I've personally gone through this because I'm the visionary too, is everybody's trying to keep up with your vision. You know what I mean? So that in EOS tracks, they call it entrepreneurial whiplash, right? As you're constantly evolving and changing. So to somehow work on yourself outside of the business and have like a normal relationship would then allow you to more consciously make your own personal decisions, I think. Yeah. Because I think, to your point, I don't think there is a process. I think it just happens.
No, it does. But how it happens and who's advising us, like you said, is a really big thing. I know my mentor often says, like, multiple perspectives is one of the key ingredients to driving decision and then creating, outcomes. However, multiple perspectives are not all created equal, right? So, like, you can't. They're not. And in the coaching world, I've seen this where. And I have a hard time even though I'm like, hey, I'm someone who's mastered sales. I'm someone who has done very well in leadership world. I've done well in organizational health. I've done some amazing work in coaching. And someone's like, oh, well, you're a life coach. And I'm like, I was like, whoa, I don't put me in that, because to me, there could be a paradigm associated with that.
Yep.
Same with consultants, right? It's like, most consultants
you Six Sigma, black belt, that's it.
Haven't done what they're helping you do. That's one challenge I have with that. Is like I've had operational background. I've come out of that world, so like I get it. And then so there's that piece. And then the coaches. There's so many coaches out there, and there's some great ones, but a lot of them couldn't coach themselves out of a paper bag. They don't. Their lives are a train wreck somewhere, and not to mention, they're broke, so they don't even. It's like, man, like you're giving people advice, like you're coaching somebody and telling them what. I was talking to somebody the other day. I got referred to me, and they're working with this coach, and he starts talking about all these things they were talking about, and I'm like, he's like, I'm talking about? I'm like, no, I don't. I mean, it was way out in the rings of Saturn. Like the plane's got to land somewhere here on this planet, man. Like these are great ideas, but there's got to be some level of application.
It's it is well. If you think about, like, to your point about all perspectives are different. So when you're that entrepreneur, and if you're the listener and you're sitting there going, okay, I'm changing in my soul and in my head, and I'm slowly evolving. I think the biggest challenge in this dynamic that I personally went through as well is that, who do you talk to that gets what you're going through, doesn't tell you just get rid of your company, but then like. I think about it back, so I had 100 employees. VP of sales was a really good friend of mine. CIO was a really good friend of mine. A couple of my salespeople, really good friends of mine. Family, the vendors. You're not going to go and say, hey, I don't really know what to do with this business anymore. I'm kind of different. And then everybody's going, do I have a job? Do I not have a job? Like, so you start to have realized that all the people that you care about rely on you. Right. And then it's so isolating. And then then I was part of Vistage or all these, peer groups, and they go there. And then my dad used to call it Dr. Phil advice. So in one 15-minute thing, I'm going to say, all right, Chris, here's what's going on. And you're going to go do this. And there's no context. And so you just feel so alone. So where and how do you process that when all advice is not created equal? And, you just explained the problem with the coaches and the advisors and all this. It's a really big challenge for owners.
Yeah, I think that's a good question, and I think you should be able to check a few boxes. One is that, does this person know what the hell they're doing? That's a box you got to check. You say, well, how do I know? Well, have they A, produced outcomes from themselves, or B, have they advised other people to create outcomes? And I'm an open book. Transparency is a big value to me, and I know we just talked to someone recently that's going to start with us in January. But one part of, I'm like, hey, would you like to talk to some of our clients? Yes. I'm like, perfect, no problem. I'll make a couple introductions. Here's some I have in mind. One's in the exact same space you are. And so my point was like, hey, go ahead, go have a conversation with our current customers. Or past customers. I don't have an issue with that. Because if I can't, and let them tell you what their experience has been. Let them tell you why they're paying the money they are. That's ownership to me, right? So if you're talking to someone, they should be able to have that level of certainty tied to something, right?
What happens when you're
shit on the table, right?
Right. And then, which makes sense, but what happens if you're so one of the listeners and an owner doesn't know what the outcome is that they're searching for? So they don't know what they want. They don't know what they want. Because they know, I give you the example, they're looking up and they're going, maybe the level of consciousness rose up a little bit, or their awareness, and they're like, I just don't know what I want, so I don't know what I'm looking for. So then people,
all right. So the folks that say I don't know what I want, I say there's a level of bullshit tied to that, because, and I think part of the reason is because this is my philosophy, is that if I'm not clear on what I want, I mean, there might be some reality to it if I got to look at the frame of who the person is. But sure, I've met a lot of folks that are in their early 20s, until you're 24, your brain's not even fully developed anyway. So I would hope maybe you don't know what you want, and that's okay, right? Like that's cool to me, but I think there's some things you do know you want too. And I think a lot of folks today, and I love the shift. More people today are focused on, it's not about like, hey, I want to be a dentist, or hey, I want to own this business. It's about, I want to create a life experience and figure out a way to resource that. Like they're not maybe saying it that way, but there's a lot of that shift going on in regards to corporate America and people entering corporate America, which I think is really cool. I think the Europeans were just in France last month as a family for a good week. And I just love this. You go out to eat, cafe, no one's trying to frickin' turn the table, drive you in, drive you out. You know what I'm saying? Like there's more people in the moment and just enjoying company and enjoying life instead of just like, go. Next thing, check a box. But the person that, says they don't know what they want, it's like, well, you got to know something. There's got to be something that like there's something you value. And I would ask that person, I'd say, well, is there any part of you that doesn't believe that you're worth it or that you could have it? Like, is that even, because like those are two limiting beliefs that are huge, right? That can run under they can run under the surface for a lot of us. It comes down to, am I good enough? Am I worth it? Right? That one is a big one for a lot of folks. And the other one is what's possible, right? And so those are limitations that could be filtering why saying I don't know what I want, because I'm scared of overcoming those two things. Does that make sense?
It does. And then when you're dealing with that, you have so many people that rely on you that it like the pressure. So it's like dealing with that and being filling I can't remember who I interviewed. It was a while ago. We're like giving yourself the time to feel and think about it without it's just hard to create that bubble of peace where you can actually think about it without having people just bombard you.
Well, you should hire, I think that person should hire someone, or maybe create a friend that owns a business that can understand their vantage point, that can listen to them and not necessarily crawl in your hole with you per se, but to help you feel. I think it's good, right? So there is a level of therapy that's I think involved for anybody.
For sure.
Because I mean, knownness is not deemed as easy. It's not. I had a client that often said, like, building a successful company is not easy, because if it were, everybody would be doing it, right?
Yep.
And
so when you watch someone that's gone through this transition, like, what are things that they successfully do, and then like, what does the outcome look like usually?
On like a business transition front?
Yeah, business transition. Okay. As they're mentally and working themselves into this. When you said like they built themselves as prison, so like getting out of that prison, like what does that look like? What are things?
Yeah, that's cool. Like, so you're really it's a process of self-discovery. You get deeper into like, who am I? How did I get to where I am? Why? It's no judgment. But like, what's next for me is, and then what do I truly value, and you see a lot of folks that are looking to transition. Oftentimes they're like a Bill Gates, like, how do I leave a legacy, right? Like, how do I drive something forward, and get involved to do that, right? Because if the fact of the matter is, if you built a business, you've got a lot of amazing talent to a degree of something, right? Like you've got resources that you could help and mentor other folks. You leverage that at nonprofits. They need the help. Like there's so many places that you could go. And I think it's a reality of like, it's not like you don't really have to lose who you are, and that who you were was not necessarily tied to what you do. And so there's a reframe that has to happen, that what I do is not who I am. But that happens even for moms who stay home and raise their kids, and I've seen this happen, and then all of a sudden become empty nesters. Like they're like, holy shit, what am I?
Yeah, right.
What do I do? Who am I? I'm a mom, and I don't have kids. I'm lost.
So interesting, Chris. Someone, the guy that was on the show last week or a couple weeks ago, he said retirement's total bullshit, and so when you say, and because it was literally only created like 50 years ago. I mean, like, I think FDR, who created Social Security, didn't even get to the age of using it himself because he died. So like, so what I find is interesting is like, especially for entrepreneurs that are goal driven. I mean, is there like a process of watching people recreate this new vision that allows them to get out? Because like this guy named Daniel Moshe, he said, I had to have this new vision that allowed me to swim out or break out of that prison. So like, what have you seen that works well for people and how to do that?
Yeah.
So besides playing golf every day, which is
it's like almost a whole other podcast, but in essence, what I typically do is I work people through, and I'll just put this out there right now is before I forget. There's the URL that I've set up called it's greatestyearsofyourlife.com. You can get a vision workbook. Since you're asking about that, someone can opt in for that and get the vision workbook, and then we'll just market the living shit out of you and sell it. Just kidding. Yes, it's an opt-in, but we will not do that. So regardless. greatestyearsofyourlife.com. So basically, like, and I'm doing a workshop next week, and what we're going to do in essence is kind of like, okay, what are my values? What do I believe about myself? We ask some deep questions on that orientation currently, and then let's navigate. Let's just sit here and let's go through departments like health and wellness, which is pretty critical first, because if I'm not healthy, doesn't really matter much, right? So that's a big one to me. So and then we walk through all of it, life experiences, what do I want my relationship with my spouse to look like, all of those things. If you're married or if you're not, that's fine. But like everyone is going to have some level of loving relationship somewhere in their life. Though we're driven that way. But there's 4 stages that need to happen in all these, and the 4 stages are getting clarity in what we want, but then also challenging our beliefs around what that is, right? Mm-hmm. And why that is, so that we can make sure that we're anchored to something that's intrinsic, not externally. And then the other piece is that then I got to figure out leverage. Why do I want this? The Simon Sinek star why, like, because that's huge. I've got to have a big, deep enough anchor. And then the 4th one is the strategies, right? Which a lot of people just go to strategies right away, but they're trying to override what's going on internally, right? That friction again. We got to remove the friction so we can. That's my thought. Is like, let's not break through. Fuck breaking through. That means I got to really push. Why don't we just find out what the resistance is and remove it? I don't know. That'd be a lot easier.
Give an example of one of those.
So let's say I had a client who basically believed that this was an interesting one. So we were doing a transition. He had built a pretty good business for himself, and he still wanted to be part of it, but he kind of like, I don't want to do this so much. I'm like, work 50, 60, 70 hours a week. I want to be less part of I want to work in the parts of the business I love the most and just pull myself out of the rest. Okay, we totally can do all those things. So we started the process of that. We built some scaffolding around him to support the areas he wasn't going to do anymore, and we worked towards that. And then what ended up happening is that I'd be talking to the other leaders in the leadership team, because I make great relationships with the executive team, and I'm working with a company because I have to, because I need to know what's going on. And then some of my check-in calls with some of the other executives are telling me of like how basically this guy's back in these operational meetings. And I'm like, he's doing. So I'm like, getting him on the phone, and I'm like, dude, what's up? Like, I don't like, because they told me like this happened, and then you got involved, and things were going well. These like, and then you start challenging it, and then you started things kind of got derailed. Like, what's up? Well, no, I just, and he starts going through his whole. He's telling me his story. Most stories are bullshit. Like it's his rationalization of why he did. So we started talking about that, and I'm like, let's stop a second. What do you believe? Now, just answer this question. Just forget everything about this. Let's put that all aside. Okay. What do you believe about success? What do you mean? I said, well, what if you're going to give a high school talk and you're going to talk about what creates success? What's the key elements of that talk? Well, I tell them, you got to work hard. I'm like, okay, what else? Well, you're going to have to struggle in order to have success. I said, really interesting. I said, so is that a core tenet? Like struggle is necessary? Absolutely. I said, well, why do you believe that is? He goes, I've never seen it any other way. I said, what part of you enjoys that out of curiosity? He's like, well, if I struggled, then I feel like I deserve the success. And I'm like, okay, brilliant. So I'm like, here we go, man. Like this was it. on the table. So then, and this guy tried many times to remove himself over the year, hired other folks, whatever. But this was it. Like, I got in there and then I'm like, okay, what if you didn't have to? Well, I wouldn't know how. I didn't ask how. I wanted to know what if. Like, is it possible? Could we go out and find somebody that's built a life with a level of success that doesn't have struggle in it? Yeah, oh, yeah, I'm sure we could. Yeah, I'm like, okay. I said, so what if you became the person who didn't have to struggle anymore? He's like, that would be amazing. Oh I'm like, okay, let's awesome. Talk about that. So what we did is we started creating a new frame, and then we worked on that piece. And it really, quite honestly, was a lot of just a process. Anytime you're looking at a transition, a big component, and I haven't said this yet, but the big theme I'm always working on is letting go. And I got to find out where they've tied themselves to what they're not willing to let go. So I can help. Like, for him, I was letting go of that story, and I'm telling you, boom, that transition, that company. And I'm still in contact with them. They just finished last year their best year in the history of the business. And he's not even at the helm.
That's so cool.
He still owns the business.
I wouldn't be surprised, Chris, if that whole dynamic that you just described probably relates to most of the listeners and most entrepreneurs. Like, you have to struggle because you just get used to getting the shit kicked out of you.
And like, dude, I'm a 7th degree black belt, and I hate getting hit. I hate it. I don't like it. I really don't. And I just soon get it over with, and it's just, but that's me, I enjoy that,
Because that was such a good response. And I'm curious on this so I saw on your website, you're familiar with the term flow by Mihai Csikszentmihalyi too, right?
Yes,
so
absolutely.
The perfect tension between challenges and skill sets, right?
Yeah.
You're over challenged, your anxiety, you're under challenged, you're bored. I've experienced it. I've had tons of people on the show describe it. How do you recreate that without the business? Or like, how have you seen people do that? Because like, I had one woman, she goes, I miss capitalism. I miss seeing the numbers and seeing the react, because it's feedback too, right? So sitting on a charity board and just playing house or doing golf or retiring is not a thing. So how do you recreate flow when you don't have a business? Because I believe that being an entrepreneur and in a business, you're living in flow like probably 90% of the time, which is like a high. I mean, it could be.
Yeah, it can be, yeah.
So how do you recreate that?
I mean, what flow to me is like, why I started surfing a few years ago, or why part of the reason I studied martial arts, or why we practice. My wife's a yoga practitioner, and so am I. Like things that get us out of our head and into our body, where we're absorbed into what's going on. We're conscious and aware, but we're not necessarily dialed into our head, right? You can't be like, thinking things through and necessarily be in a flow state, because flow is, think about how water moves, right? But that's a process. You can apply it to business, but you can apply it to a lot of things. Mm-hmm. I think there's an element of inspiration tied to that. That's a critical piece too. And in essence, what I think, what I've found is that you have to unpack it. You have to unpack what creates your own flow. And then once you have that, now you can figure out, okay, well, where else can I plug it in? Because we can create a story of I have to have it. Maybe it is you start another business. I'm not saying you shouldn't. Or maybe you help someone else. You become an advisor to someone in a business. I'm not saying, like whatever that is, for those life experiences that you want to drive, that generates that flow state. My grandfather, who I hadn't talked about yet, but I typically bring him up in interviews. He died last year. He was 99, and he died because he just didn't want to live any longer. He was just done. There was no really major health issues he had. 98 years old, still driving around, living at home, doing his thing, playing tennis well into almost probably around 90 anyway. Was filming downhill ski, created a lot. But so he retired. Think about it. So he retired, like, I don't know, say by that time he was 60. And then right away he started another business in real estate, and he loved the woods. So he'd buy pieces of land and clear little paths in the woods, and then sell them. And then he just did that in fact, I still get, I inherited a piece of, I inherited part of that business, still exists right now. Like, there's not much there, but he winded a bit of it down. But it's just funny, like, that was his thing, right? And he found, like, He was a very social person. He had deep, meaningful relationships, which is a big piece too, right? If you look at like books like the Blue Zones, where you basically look and study, well, what drives longevity and happiness, right? We want, I think at the end of the day, we all want to be happy. We want to have joy. We want to have peace. So what drives all that? Like, let's really get to the core element of what we're about, right? Flow is important, but I really want to be happy. I want to have joy. I want to have peace. I want to be fulfilled.
Yep.
So if I can how do I do those 4 things, right? And so there is some methodology to that, like having deep, meaningful relationships and taking care of ourselves. Whatever it is, something that's tied to purpose is what we're talking about, right? Something that's tied to purpose, we can generate flow, whatever that is, right? And our business can become that, but we don't want it to become like an addiction, right? Which a lot of folks, it is like, I need that, right? Okay, well, let's redirect it then. A lot of substitution. I got to put something else in its place.
Yep,
right?
To remove the friction, right?
That's right. That's right.
I think, what all the stuff that you're saying, Chris, is like, it's just a level of awareness to be able to shift the energy, right? Because you're going to have all that stuff, and if you're getting all those if the business is feeding all those mechanisms and you don't know how it's feeding it, that's why I believe in Bo Burlingham's thing when he said 75% of the people are unhappy, is because they sold the business not knowing, and that's a surgical removal. Like they didn't know where the business was feeding those different parts, right? So then they're going, then it's all of a sudden you have to recreate that, and there's depression, anxiety, all that stuff afterwards.
Absolutely. Totally agree, man.
This has been absolutely a freaking blast. If you were to go back, because we covered some serious ground. If you were to go back and say, to the listener that, that is, maybe in the thick of it and is not conscious, or they're looking up for the first time, what is some actionable advice to say, okay, here's how to start, chiseling your way out of that prison, or becoming more aware, or engineering the life that they want?
Yeah. Well, I guess I'd ask first, like, on a scale 1 to 10, how fulfilled are you? And then answer that about happiness and how much joy and peace do you have? To go and just do a self-calibration. Where am I at on 1 to 10? And if I'm not a 7 and above in any of those categories, then why is that? Right? And, then I would just say, okay, well, where am I stuck? And then reach out to someone, reach out to someone that might, to talk about that, because we get stuck. And what happens, I'm going to close this idea, is that I'll ask people, like, well, how do you have to be, like, you're happy now? Okay, well, how do you have to be happy? What does that mean? Well, if I'm you tomorrow, like, what are the rules around happiness?
If that's a really
people
cool
want to
question.
think about that, right? Well, in order for me to feel happy, I got to do something for someone else, and then and then they appreciate it. I'm like, well, that sounds kind of sucky to me, because then you have no control over your own happiness. You've created a rule that says you got to do something and they got to appreciate it. You don't have control over that outcome, if they appreciate it or not. So, guess you don't get to be happy today.
That's so
right?
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, like, what there is a recipe, there is a process, but we often create rules, and the person out there, that doesn't have fulfillment, there's probably some rules that they've created, or there's definitely a limiting belief that you have that needs to be changed. And your programming needs to be rewired. Your desire to be successful, your desire to have fun and joy and enjoy life and be fulfilled. And yes, life has ups and downs, but most of it should be good. Most of it should be positive, and it should be. We should be thankful, because it's a great experience to have, and we should enjoy it.
You deserve it, right?
Yeah. That's right.
So the person that says, "Oh my God, I just want to call you because you sound like you know your shit," what's the best way to get in touch with you?
You can. My website, www.chrisyonker.com. So if someone wanted to get a hold of us, someone on my team would be happy to get back to them and connect. Absolutely. And greatestyearsofyourlife.com is where that vision workbook resides, that you can download and get into if you want to. And also, if you have interest in, like, attending a future vision workshop or whatever, just obviously reach out to us, get on our list, and we can keep it posted on when, and let us know that you have interest, because we do those typically by invitation only. So
That's awesome. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. I love the work that you're doing. So keep it up.